1878. Nearly 1,000 members of the Ku Klux Klan rode into a self-governed black town with a list of names, coils of rope, and pre-dug graves, certain they were hunting farmers, preachers, and widows who would kneel when ordered. By morning, one founder lay dead in the street, shot for refusing to bow, and the town's leaders had been publicly marked for hanging. The Klan withdrew satisfied, promising to return and finish the work. What they never learned, what their arrogance made invisible, was who had built that town, who had buried its dead, and who had memorized kill zones long before peace was possible. When the Klan came back, their banners were raised and their confidence intact. The town was still standing. Their certainty was not. But let me start from the beginning. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. The sun hung low over the settlement, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Josiah Freeman worked alone in his carpentry shed, planing a coffin lid with steady strokes. The wood curled away in thin ribbons, releasing the smell of fresh pine. He was a tall man, lean but solid, with gray threading through his close-cropped hair. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, smoothing the grain until it gleamed under the fading light. He did not think about what the coffin was for. Not yet. A child had died 3 days ago, fever, and the mother had asked for something beautiful. Josiah would give her that. The coffin would have clean corners and a lid that fit perfectly. It would hold her grief without adding to it. Ruth appeared in the doorway, carrying a basket covered with cloth. She was shorter than her husband, with strong shoulders and hands that had caught more babies than she could count. Her presence filled the small space without her saying a word. "You eating tonight?" she asked. Josiah set down the plane and wiped his hands on his apron. "I was planning on it." "Good." Ruth stepped inside and set the basket on his workbench. She uncovered it, revealing cornbread wrapped in linen, still warm. "Samuel killed a chicken. I took some for stew." Josiah broke off a piece of cornbread and chewed slowly. "How's the Wallace baby?" "Strong," Ruth said. "Hungry." "Her mama's doing well, too." She watched her husband eat, then added quietly, "You coming home soon?" "Soon as I finish this." Ruth nodded. She did not push. She had learned long ago that Josiah worked late when something weighed on him. She touched his arm briefly, then left, without another word. Across town, Caleb Moore stood outside the schoolhouse, watching the last of his students scatter toward home. He was younger than Josiah by 10 years, compact and restless, with scars across his knuckles that he never explained. The children called him Mr. Moore, and listened when he spoke, because his voice carried authority without needing volume. A boy lingered near the steps, clutching a primer. "You forget something, Thomas?" Caleb asked. "No, sir." The boy hesitated. "I just wanted to practice reading one more time." Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. "Tomorrow," he said gently. "Go on home now. Your mama will worry." Thomas nodded and ran off, his bare feet kicking up dust. Caleb watched him go, then turned back to the schoolhouse. The building was simple, unpainted wood, a single room with benches instead of desks. But it was theirs. They had built it themselves. He locked the door and started walking toward the church. Isaiah Crowder was already there, sweeping the front steps. He was broader than Caleb, with a preacher's voice that could fill the entire sanctuary without strain. Tonight he worked quietly, moving the broom in slow arcs. The church was small but well kept, with whitewashed walls and windows that caught the last of the daylight. "You staying for prayer meeting?" Isaiah asked as Caleb approached. "Maybe." Caleb leaned against the railing. "Depends on how long you preach." Isaiah smiled faintly. "I'll keep it short." They stood together in comfortable silence. Down the road, Samuel Tate's forge was still glowing. The blacksmith worked late most evenings, hammering out tools and nails that kept the town running. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal echoed across the settlement like a heartbeat. "Quiet tonight," Caleb said. Isaiah nodded. "Too quiet." Neither man said more. They had learned to trust the feeling that lived in the space between words. Ruth walked home through the center of town, nodding to neighbors who sat on their porches. Women mended clothing in the fading light. Men smoked pipes and talked in low voices. Children chased each other through yards, their laughter cutting through the stillness. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. But Ruth noticed the details others missed. The way old Mrs. Patterson kept glancing toward the road. How James Tucker had moved his wagon closer to his house. The dogs that usually roamed freely were tied up, restless and whining. She stopped at the well to draw water and found 3 other women already there. They greeted her warmly, but their smiles did not reach their eyes. "You hear anything?" one of them asked quietly. "No," Ruth said. "You?" The woman shook her head, but her hands trembled as she worked the pump. Samuel Tate banked his forge and stepped outside to cool off. He was a thick man with arms like tree trunks and a face that carried permanent soot stains. He had fought hard to build this place, and he refused to live in fear of losing it. When white men came through town asking questions, Samuel looked them in the eye and answered directly. When merchants tried to cheat him on iron prices, he laughed and walked away. He believed dignity was something you claimed, not something granted. Tonight he stood in his yard and surveyed the town. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lanterns flickered to life in windows. Everything looked as it should. But the birds had stopped singing. Samuel frowned and wiped his hands on his apron. He walked to the road and listened. The evening was too still. No crickets. No night sounds rising from the woods. Then he heard it. Distant, but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Many of them. He turned toward the church. The bells were ringing for evening prayer, their clear tones carrying across the settlement. Samuel started walking faster. He needed to tell Isaiah. They needed to warn people. They needed... The church bells stopped. Not a natural ending, but a sudden silence, as if someone had grabbed the rope mid-swing. Samuel broke into a run. All across town, people stopped what they were doing. Heads turned, conversations died. The absence of sound was louder than any alarm. Josiah stepped out of his workshop, still holding his plane. Ruth came out of their house, gripping the doorframe. Caleb and Isaiah stood frozen on the church steps. Then the dogs started barking. Not playful or territorial, but frantic, terrified. Torches appeared at the tree line. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Moving toward the settlement like a slow tide of fire. The torches came down from the hills like falling stars. They moved in formation, spreading wide to encircle the settlement. The sound followed. Hoofbeats turning into thunder. Voices rising into howls. Men in white robes and hoods emerged from the darkness, their faces hidden behind cloth masks with crude eye holes cut through. Josiah counted them as they came. 50, 100, 200. The numbers kept climbing. He had seen armies before. This was an army. "Get inside," he said quietly to Ruth. She did not move. "Josiah. Inside. Now." His voice left no room for argument. Ruth grabbed the nearest children playing in the yard and pulled them toward the house. Other families were doing the same, yanking loved ones off porches, slamming doors, extinguishing lamps. But it was too late to hide. The white-robed men were already surrounding every building. A young man named Marcus ran past Josiah's workshop carrying an axe. 2 others followed him, armed with farming tools. Josiah stepped into their path. "No." Marcus tried to push past. "They're coming for us." Josiah caught his arm. His grip was iron. "You fight now, everyone dies. Put it down." "We can't just..." "Put it down." The authority in Josiah's voice stopped Marcus cold. Something in the older man's eyes, something that had nothing to do with carpentry or coffin-making, made the younger men lower their weapons. They did not understand what they were seeing, but they obeyed it. The white-robed men reached the center of town. They carried torches and rifles. Some had ropes coiled over their shoulders. Their leader rode a tall black horse and wore a robe trimmed in red. He removed his hood, revealing a sunburned face with a thick mustache. Captain Thomas Wickett surveyed the settlement with the satisfied expression of a man who had already won. "Bring them out!" he shouted. His men moved systematically through the town. Doors were kicked open. Families were dragged into the street regardless of age or protest. A woman screamed as rough hands pulled her from her home. An elderly man stumbled and fell, only to be hauled upright by his collar. Children cried. Parents tried to shield them and were struck down for the attempt. Josiah stood in the street, with his hands visible and empty. Ruth emerged from their house despite his order, positioning herself beside him. Caleb and Isaiah joined them, forming a line of calm in the chaos. They did not run. They did not fight. They stood together and waited. Fire bloomed at the edge of town. Someone had torched the cotton shed. Flames climbed into the night sky, casting dancing shadows across frightened faces. More fires followed. The schoolhouse, the community barn. Smoke rolled through the settlement, stinging eyes and throats. The white-robed men slaughtered livestock methodically. Chickens were grabbed and wrung. A pig squealed as it was shot. The town's only cow died thrashing in the mud, bleeding from a dozen knife wounds. The destruction was purposeful, deliberate. They were not just killing animals. They were killing the town's ability to survive. Captain Wickett dismounted and walked through the gathered crowd of black families. His men had forced everyone to kneel. Those who resisted were clubbed until they complied. The captain moved slowly, enjoying the fear he inspired. "You people got too comfortable," he said. His voice carried across the settlement. "Building towns, opening schools, acting like you're the same as white folks." He spat into the dirt. "You ain't, and it's time you remembered that." Samuel Tate stood near the front of the crowd. He was the only person still standing. Blood ran from a cut above his eye where someone had struck him, but he had not gone down. He would not kneel. "Samuel," Josiah said quietly. A warning. Samuel did not look at him. He stared directly at Captain Wickett. "This is our land. We bought it. We built it. You got no right." A white-robed man swung a rifle butt into Samuel's ribs. The blacksmith staggered, but stayed on his feet. Another man hit him from behind. Samuel's knees buckled, but he caught himself, straightened, stood. "Kneel, boy," Wickett said. "No." The word hung in the smoky air. Simple? Final? Absolute. Wickett's expression hardened. "I said, kneel." Samuel met his eyes. "No." What happened next was not chaotic. It was controlled, methodical. 3 men surrounded Samuel and beat him with deliberate precision. Fists to his stomach, boots to his legs. When he fell, they kicked him until he tried to rise, then beat him down again. The sound of impact echoed across the silent crowd. Nobody screamed. Nobody moved. They could only watch. Samuel managed to get to his hands and knees. Blood dripped from his mouth. He raised his head and looked at Wickett one more time. His eyes held no fear, only defiance. Wickett drew a pistol from his belt. He aimed it at Samuel's chest. "Last chance, boy." Samuel opened his mouth. Whether to speak or spit, nobody would ever know. The gunshot cracked across the settlement. Samuel Tate fell forward and did not move again. Women covered their children's eyes. Men closed their own. Ruth's hand found Josiah's and gripped it hard enough to hurt. But Josiah's face remained expressionless. Calm. Empty. Captain Wickett holstered his pistol and turned to address the crowd. This is what happens when you forget your place. This town exists because we allow it. You breathe because we permit it. Remember that. The fires burned higher. Smoke choked the air. White-robed men moved through the crowd, searching homes, destroying whatever they found. Books were torn and scattered. Furniture was smashed. A woman's wedding quilt was ripped apart and thrown into the mud. Hours passed. The terror was not loud or frenzied. It was slow and thorough. Every family was forced to watch, as the town they had built was systematically violated. Nobody fought back. Nobody ran. They knelt in the dirt and endured. As dawn began to gray the eastern horizon, Captain Wicket remounted his horse. His men gathered around him, torches still burning. Samuel's body lay in the street where it had fallen. Josiah stepped forward. He moved slowly, hands visible, posture bent. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, defeated. "Please," he said. "We understand. We'll do better. Just, please don't burn it all." Wicket looked down at him. The satisfaction on his face was complete. "You telling me you learned your lesson?" "Yes, sir." Josiah kept his eyes down. "We learned." Wicket studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Good. That's real good." He gestured to his men. "Let's go, boys. I think they understand now." The white-robed army withdrew as methodically as they had arrived, riding back toward the hills. Their torches faded into the pre-dawn darkness. Their voices grew distant. Finally, they were gone. The settlement remained frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Samuel Tate's body lay still in the street, blood pooling beneath him. Josiah straightened slowly. His submissive posture fell away like a discarded coat. When he looked at Caleb and Isaiah, his eyes were no longer empty. They were calculating. "Get him inside," Josiah said quietly, nodding toward Samuel. "Then gather everyone in the church." The sun rose red over the settlement. Smoke still drifted from charred buildings. The cotton shed was gone. Nothing remained but blackened posts and ash. The schoolhouse had collapsed inward, its walls reduced to skeletal frames. The smell of burned wood mixed with something worse, something organic that nobody wanted to name. Samuel Tate's body lay on a carpenter's bench in Josiah's workshop. Ruth had cleaned the blood from his face and hands. She had closed his eyes and straightened his limbs, giving him dignity in death that he had been denied in his final moments. The gunshot wound in his chest was covered by a clean white cloth. His hands were folded across his stomach. Josiah worked through the morning building the coffin. His movements were precise and unhurried. Each nail was driven true. Each joint fitted perfectly. He did not speak. He did not pause. The work was all that existed. Ruth brought him water. "You need to rest. I need to finish this." "Josiah, I need to finish this." She set the cup down and left him alone. By midday, the coffin was complete. Simple pine boards joined with care. No decoration, no ornament, just solid construction that would last. Josiah and Caleb lifted Samuel's body and placed it inside. They did not rush. They handled him gently, as though he might still feel pain. The burial happened at sunset. The entire town gathered at the small cemetery on the eastern edge of the settlement. Graves already dotted the hillside. Children who had died of fever. Elders who had passed peacefully. A young mother lost in childbirth. Now, Samuel would join them. Isaiah stood at the head of the grave, wearing his preacher's coat. His Bible was open, but he did not read from it. He looked at the faces surrounding him instead. Young and old, frightened and angry, broken and defiant. "Samuel Tate was a good man," Isaiah said. His voice carried across the cemetery. "He worked hard. He loved his family. He helped build this town with his own hands." He paused. "He died because he would not kneel." Someone in the crowd sobbed. Others stood in silence. "We buried our weapons when we came here," Isaiah continued. "We buried our anger. We thought if we built something good, something peaceful, we could leave the war behind. His hands tightened on the Bible. We were wrong. Josiah and 3 other men lowered the coffin into the ground. The ropes creaked. The pine box settled into the earth with a hollow sound. One by one, mourners stepped forward and dropped handfuls of soil onto the lid. The sound was final, absolute. When the grave was filled, the crowd dispersed slowly. Families returned to damaged homes. Children were put to bed despite their protests. The settlement fell quiet as darkness gathered. Josiah waited until full night before moving. He walked through the settlement with purpose, stopping at specific homes. He spoke quietly at each door. Some men nodded immediately. Others hesitated before agreeing. Within an hour, a dozen men followed him toward the church. The church itself had survived the raid. Its white paint was smudged with smoke, but the structure stood intact. Josiah led the group inside, past the sanctuary, through a door behind the pulpit. Wooden steps descended into darkness. The basement was small and dirt-floored. It smelled of earth and old wood. A single oil lamp hung from a ceiling beam, casting shadows across the walls. Josiah lit it carefully. The men gathered in the cramped space looked confused. This was storage area, nothing more. Crates and barrels lined the walls. Dust covered everything. Josiah knelt beside a section of floorboards near the back wall. He worked his fingers into a gap and lifted. The boards came up easily, revealing a hollow space beneath. He reached inside and withdrew a long wooden crate. The crate was military issue. Stenciled letters on the side read, U.S. Army, Springfield Rifles, QT 2012. Silence filled the basement. Josiah opened the crate. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a dozen rifles. Their metal gleamed dully in the lamplight. Every weapon was clean, oiled, and ready. Josiah lifted one and checked the action. It moved smoothly. He set it aside and pulled out another crate. This one contained ammunition, boxes of cartridges, carefully preserved. More crates followed, pistols, powder, percussion caps, medical supplies, a folded map showing regional terrain, and finally, a leather satchel containing yellowed papers, discharge documents, unit rosters, commendations. Caleb stepped forward and picked up one of the rifles. He worked the bolt with practiced ease, sighted down the barrel, checked the trigger mechanism. His hands moved with muscle memory that had nothing to do with teaching schoolchildren. Springfield Model 1863, he said quietly. I carried one just like it for 3 years. Isaiah opened the leather satchel and removed the papers. He unfolded a discharge document and held it to the light. Sergeant Isaiah Crowder, 3rd Regiment, United States Colored Troops, Artillery Division. He looked up at the gathered men. That was my rank. My unit. Josiah stood with his arms crossed. I was regimental enforcer, 10th Regiment. I kept order when order was needed. I made hard decisions so my commanding officers did not have to carry that weight. He met each man's eyes in turn. I killed men who threatened my unit. I killed men who deserved it. I killed men who did not. The men in the basement stared at him. This was not the calm undertaker they knew. This was someone else, someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. We hid this, Josiah continued. All of it. We came here to build something better than war. We wanted our children to grow up without learning how to kill. We wanted peace. His jaw tightened. We were fools. We thought if we were quiet enough, worked hard enough, caused no trouble, they would leave us alone, Caleb added. He set the rifle down carefully. We thought submission would keep us safe. Samuel proved that lie, Isaiah said. He knelt for nobody, and they killed him for it. A young man named Marcus, the same one Josiah had stopped from fighting the previous night, spoke up. So what do we do now? Before anyone could answer, the basement door opened. A teenage boy stumbled down the stairs, breathing hard. His name was Thomas, one of the scouts who had been watching the roads. "They comin' back," Thomas gasped. "I heard them talking at the crossroads. 3 days. Captain Wickett's gathering more men. He said they're going to execute the leaders this time. Hang them in the street, then burn everything." The basement went silent. 3 days, Josiah repeated. He looked at the weapons laid out before them. 3 days to decide if we run or if we fight. Caleb picked up the rifle again. "I'm done running." Isaiah closed his Bible and set it aside. "So am I." Josiah nodded slowly. "Then we have work to do." The men did not leave the basement immediately. They stood in silence, processing what had been revealed. The weapons gleamed in the lamplight. The discharge papers lay scattered across a crate. Everything they had buried was now exposed. Josiah broke the silence. "We do not have time for doubt. We have 3 days. Maybe less if Wickett changes his mind." He gestured to the weapons. "These need to be distributed. Quietly. No one outside this group knows yet. We keep it that way until we're ready." "Who else fights?" Marcus asked. "Only men who can follow orders without question," Josiah said. "Only men who understand what discipline means. Anger gets you killed. Rage gets everyone killed. We need soldiers, not a mob." Caleb stepped forward. "I was a scout, close combat specialist. I can teach hand-to-hand, knife work, silent movement." He looked at the younger men. "Anyone who cannot stay quiet stays behind. No exceptions." Isaiah moved to stand beside them. "I ran artillery. I understand positioning, fields of fire, defensive structures." He picked up the folded map and spread it across a crate. "We need to know every approach to this settlement, every road, every path through the woods. We turn this place into a fortress they cannot breach." Josiah nodded. "Marcus, who else among the young men can be trusted?" Marcus thought carefully. "David. He works steady and does not talk much. Abraham. He is strong and listens well. Maybe Jacob, though he runs hot sometimes." "Hot gets him killed and us with him," Josiah said flatly. "Can you control him?" "I can try." "Trying is not good enough. Either he follows orders exactly, or he stays home with the women and children." Marcus swallowed hard. "I will make sure he understands." "Good. Bring David and Abraham here tomorrow night. Tell them nothing until they arrive. If they ask questions, you say there is work to be done and nothing more." Isaiah traced his finger along the map. "The main road approaches from the west. That is where they came from last time. But there are 2 smaller paths, one from the north through the timber stand, one from the south past the creek crossing. They will use all 3, Caleb said. "Standard encirclement tactics. Pin us in the center and squeeze." "Then we do not let them squeeze," Josiah replied. "We control the approaches. We make them come to us on our terms, not theirs." He turned to another man in the group, an older veteran named Elijah, who had said nothing so far. "You were infantry, correct?" "2nd Regiment," Elijah confirmed. 3 years. Can you still shoot?" "My hands shake some, but at close range, I do not miss. Close range is all we need. You help train the younger men. Basic marksmanship, breath control, trigger discipline. No wasted ammunition." Elijah nodded. "When do we start?" "Tonight. Right now." Josiah looked around the basement. "We have 3 days. We do not sleep much. We do not rest. We prepare." The men began moving with purpose. Rifles were distributed carefully, one to each veteran first, then to younger men who would be trained. Ammunition was counted and divided. The map was studied closely, with Isaiah marking defensive positions using charcoal. Josiah climbed the stairs and found Ruth waiting in the sanctuary. She was not alone. 4 other women stood with her, all widows whose husbands had died during the war or in the years since. They carried baskets filled with cloth, needles, thread, and bottles. "You knew," Josiah said. "Of course I knew," Ruth replied calmly. "I have been married to you for 15 years. You think I did not notice the weight you carried? The nightmares you would not speak about? She set her basket down on a pew. I knew what you were. I married you anyway. The other women murmured agreement. One of them, Sister Martha, whose husband had died at Fort Wagner, stepped forward. Our men were soldiers. We were their support. We kept them alive when the army would not. She opened her basket to reveal bandages, sutures, carbolic acid, and surgical tools. We do the same now. Ruth moved closer to Josiah. Her voice dropped so only he could hear. You think we built this settlement alone? You think we survived by accident? She touched his arm. We have always been ready. We just hoped we would never need to be. Josiah felt something loosen in his chest. He had carried the burden of preparation alone for so long that he had forgotten others might carry it with him. We need a medical station, Ruth continued. Somewhere central but protected. The church basement is too exposed. If fighting reaches the settlement center, wounded men cannot get there safely. The root cellar behind our house, Josiah said. It is underground, reinforced, and away from the main roads. Good. We start preparing it tonight. Boil water. Prepare bandages. Organize supplies. Ruth looked at the other women. No different than what we did during the war. Sister Martha nodded. Except this time, we are not waiting in camps. We are here. We fight beside our men. No, Josiah said firmly. You keep them alive. That is how you fight. Let us handle the killing. And when the killing reaches our doors? Another widow asked. Her name was Sister Anne, and her voice was steady despite the question. What then? Josiah met her eyes. Then you do what you must to survive. But we make sure it never reaches that point. The women dispersed quietly, taking their baskets with them. Ruth lingered a moment longer. Do not become what you were, she said softly. Do what is necessary, but do not lose yourself in it. I will try. Promise me. Josiah looked at his wife, this woman who had seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. I promise. She kissed his cheek and left. Dawn began to break outside. Gray light filtered through the church windows. Josiah returned to the basement, where the men were still working. Weapons had been distributed. Assignments had been made. The map was marked with defensive position. Listen, Josiah said, his voice cutting through the quiet activity. Everyone stopped. We do not celebrate. We do not boast. We do not tell anyone what we are doing until the moment comes. He looked at each man in turn. You go home. You sleep if you can. Tomorrow we begin training in earnest. Day after tomorrow, we fortify. Third day, we wait. And if they come early? Marcus asked. Then we adapt. But we do not panic. We do not break discipline. We trust our training, and we trust each other. Josiah's expression hardened. The Ku Klux Klan thinks we are broken. They think one raid shattered us. We let them keep thinking that until the moment we prove them wrong. The men filed out of the basement one by one. Josiah assigned watches, rotating shifts to monitor the roads and report any movement. No one was to approach the settlement without being seen first. As the last man left, Josiah extinguished the oil lamp. Darkness filled the basement. He stood alone among the empty crates and hidden weapons, feeling the weight of what was coming settle onto his shoulders. 3 days. The sun rose on a settlement that looked unchanged. Women carried water from the well. Children swept porches. Men walked to their workshops and fields with tools slung over their shoulders. Everything appeared normal. Everything was rehearsed. Josiah worked in his carpentry shop, planing boards for a coffin he did not need yet. The rhythmic scrape of wood filled the small space. Through the open door, he watched the street. Every person who passed received a slight nod. Nothing more. No words. No signals that might draw attention. Marcus arrived mid-morning with a wagon of lumber. He unloaded it slowly, making conversation about grain prices and weather patterns, topics any neighbor might overhear without concern. Only when they moved inside did his voice drop. David and Abraham agreed. Marcus said quietly, They will come tonight, after dark. Jacob refused. Refused or cannot be trusted? Both. He wanted to know why first. When I would not tell him, he said he would not follow orders blindly. Josiah nodded. Then he stays behind. Better to have fewer men who listen than more who do not. He ran his hand along a planed board, checking for smoothness. Anyone else ask questions? No. Most people are too frightened to ask anything. They keep their heads down and wait. Good. Fear keeps them cautious. Caution keeps them alive. Josiah set the board aside. Go home. Act normal. Tonight you bring David and Abraham to the church basement. Same time as before. Marcus left with the empty wagon. Josiah returned to his work, but his mind calculated constantly, counting weapons, counting men, counting hours until the Ku Klux Klan returned. Caleb spent the morning teaching. 20 children sat in the one-room schoolhouse, working through arithmetic problems on slate boards. He moved between rows, correcting mistakes and offering quiet encouragement. His voice remained calm. His expression showed nothing. At noon, he dismissed the students for lunch. They scattered into the street, shouting and playing as children do. Caleb watched them go, then locked the schoolhouse door. He walked north out of the settlement, following a narrow path that led toward the timber stand Isaiah had marked on the map. To anyone watching, he appeared to be taking a midday walk, something he did often enough that it drew no suspicion. The path wound through dense pine trees. Caleb moved quietly, scanning the ground for tracks. He found them a quarter-mile out. Fresh hoofprints, multiple horses, heading east toward the main road. He knelt and pressed his fingers into the soil. The edges were still damp. Recent, within the last few hours. He followed the tracks carefully, staying off the path itself. The hoofprints led to a clearing where the riders had stopped. Cigarette butts littered the ground. Bootprints circled a charred fire pit. Caleb counted the prints. 5 men, maybe 6. They had been watching the settlement. He memorized the clearing's location relative to the settlement, then backtracked along a different route. When he emerged from the timber stand, he walked casually toward the creek that marked the southern boundary. An older white farmer named Parsons worked a field across the water. His property bordered the settlement's edge. Parsons had never been friendly, but he had never been openly hostile either. He existed in that dangerous middle ground, not violent himself, but willing to look away when others were. Caleb waved. Parsons straightened from his plow and did not wave back. He stared for a long moment, then spat into the dirt and returned to his work. Caleb noted the rejection, noted the deliberate coldness. Parsons knew something, or he had been told something. Either way, his behavior confirmed what the hoofprints suggested. The Ku Klux Klan was preparing. Isaiah spent the day walking the settlement's perimeter, carrying a Bible and stopping occasionally to kneel in prayer. To anyone observing, he was simply a preacher tending to his spiritual duties. In reality, he was measuring distances and angles. He stood at the western edge where the main road entered the settlement. The road was wide enough for wagons and riders to move in formation. No natural choke points. No way to funnel attackers into a killing field without constructing barriers. He walked south to the creek crossing. The water was shallow now, barely knee-deep, but the banks were steep. Horses would have to slow to navigate the slope. That created vulnerability. He marked the spot mentally, imagining where riflemen could position themselves in the trees on the far side. North, the timber stand offered cover, but also concealment for attackers. The path Caleb had walked earlier was narrow, single file only. Defenders could hold it easily if they knew it was being used. Isaiah returned to the church and sketched his observations onto the map. Each approach had weaknesses. Each weakness could be exploited. The question was whether they had enough men to cover all 3 simultaneously. The answer was no. They would have to choose. Ruth worked in the root cellar behind her house, transforming it into a medical station. Sister Martha and Sister Ann helped her move supplies down the narrow stairs. They lined the walls with shelves, stocking them with bandages, carbolic acid, laudanum, and surgical tools wrapped in clean cloth. "We need more water," Sister Martha said. "If fighting starts, we cannot risk going to the well." "Barrels," Ruth replied. "We fill barrels now and store them here, enough for washing wounds and drinking." Sister Ann carried down a heavy pot. "What about light? If we are working at night, we need lamps. Candles only. Lamp smoke will give away the location." Ruth arranged bottles on a shelf, organizing them by type. "We work by candlelight and pray our hands stay steady." The women moved efficiently, speaking little. They had done this before, prepared for violence they hoped would never come. The familiarity brought no comfort, only grim determination. Sunset arrived slowly. The sky turned amber, then red, then purple. Shadows lengthened across the settlement. Families gathered for evening meals. Conversations were quiet. Children were sent to bed early. Caleb returned to his small house and found Josiah waiting on the porch. "Tracks?" Josiah asked. 5 or 6 riders stopped in the clearing north of here. They were watching us." "How recent?" "This morning. Maybe earlier." Josiah's jaw tightened. "They are scouting, learning our routines, counting our numbers." "Which means they are planning something more than a raid," Caleb said. "They want to know exactly how to hit us." Isaiah approached from the street, his Bible tucked under his arm. He climbed the porch steps and leaned against the railing. "Parsons would not acknowledge me today," Isaiah said. "He saw me walking his property line and turned away." "Same here," Caleb confirmed. "He knows something." "They all know something," Josiah replied. "The question is whether they are helping or simply staying out of the way." The 3 men stood in silence as darkness fell. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then another. The sound carried across the settlement, sharp, insistent, territorial. Caleb tilted his head. "That is coming from the east road." "Dogs do not bark at nothing," Isaiah said. Josiah stepped off the porch. "Get Marcus. Tell him to bring David and Abraham now. We do not wait until later." Caleb moved immediately, disappearing into the darkness. Isaiah remained on the porch. "You think they are here already?" "I think they are close enough that the dogs can smell them," Josiah replied. "And if the dogs can smell them, we do not have 3 days anymore." The church basement filled quickly. Marcus arrived with David and Abraham, both men moving with the quiet urgency of those who understood danger without needing explanation. Josiah counted heads, 12 men total, including himself, Caleb, and Isaiah. Not enough to hold the entire perimeter. Barely enough to hold one approach. He spread the hand-drawn map across the table. A single candle provided the only light. "Scouts are near," Josiah said. "We do not have 3 days. We might not have 3 hours." He pointed to the eastern road. "That is where the dogs barked. That is where they will come from first." Caleb leaned over the map. "If they are scouting, they will send small groups, 2 or 3 men. They want to see how we respond." "Then we show them nothing," Josiah replied. "No fires, no gatherings. Everyone stays inside with doors barred. We let them think we are sleeping." Isaiah traced the timber stand with his finger. "If they approach from here, they can move through the trees without being seen from the road. We need eyes in those woods." "I will go," Caleb said. "Not alone." Josiah looked at Marcus. "You go with him. Stay silent. Stay hidden. If you see riders, you do not engage. You come back and report." Marcus nodded. David, a stocky man with carpenter's hands, spoke carefully. "What if they find us before we find them?" "Then you run," Josiah said bluntly. "You are scouts, not soldiers. Your job is information, not fighting." Abraham shifted his weight. He was younger than the others, barely 20, but he had grown up listening to war stories. "What about weapons?" Josiah reached beneath the table and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. He unrolled it, revealing a Springfield rifle and ammunition. One rifle. Caleb carries it. Marcus, you take a knife. Nothing more. He distributed weapons to the remaining men. Rifles for those who had military experience, knives for those who did not. Each man checked his weapon in silence, movements automatic and practiced. Positions, Josiah continued. David and Abraham, you hold the western road. Stay in the old barn where you can see anyone approaching. Do not shoot unless they attack first. Isaiah, you take the church tower. From there you can see the entire settlement. If shooting starts, you coordinate. Tell us where the threat is coming from. Isaiah accepted a rifle and nodded. The rest of you spread along the southern tree line. Stay low. Stay quiet. If riders come through, let them pass, unless they stop. Josiah's voice hardened. If they stop, if they dismount, if they set fires, then you shoot. He looked each man in the eye. We are not starting a war tonight, but if they bring one to us, we will finish it. The men dispersed into the darkness. Caleb and Marcus moved toward the timber stand, keeping to shadows. The settlement behind them fell into unnatural silence. No lanterns, no voices, no movement. It looked abandoned, empty, exactly as Josiah intended. Caleb entered the timber stand from the south, using the same path he had walked earlier. Marcus followed 3 paces behind, his breathing controlled and even. They moved without speaking, communicating only through hand signals. The trees closed around them. Moonlight filtered through branches, creating patterns of silver and black across the forest floor. Caleb stopped frequently, listening. The woods were never truly silent. Insects buzzed, leaves rustled, small animals moved through underbrush. But beneath those natural sounds, he searched for something else, something human. He found it 20 minutes later. Hoofbeats, distant but approaching. Caleb dropped to one knee and motioned Marcus down beside him. They pressed against a fallen log, making themselves invisible in the shadows. The hoofbeats grew louder. 3 horses, maybe 4, moving slowly, carefully. The riders emerged from the darkness. 3 men wearing hoods, rifles slung across their backs. They rode single file, their horses picking carefully through the trees. The lead rider held a torch, its flame casting wild shadows. Caleb's hand moved to the rifle. He did not raise it. Not yet. The riders stopped 30 yards away. One dismounted and knelt, examining the ground, looking for tracks, looking for evidence of activity. Anyone been through here? The dismounted rider asked. Hard to say, another replied. Ground's too hard to tell. Check further up. I want to know if they use this path. The dismounted rider walked forward, directly toward Caleb's position. Caleb set the rifle down silently, drew his knife, waited. The rider came closer. 10 yards, 5 yards. He stopped at the fallen log and leaned over it, peering into the darkness beyond. Caleb moved. He rose in one fluid motion, his left hand clamping over the rider's mouth, his right hand driving the knife upward beneath the rib cage. The blade found the heart. The rider jerked once, then went limp. Caleb lowered the body behind the log without sound. Blood soaked into the earth. Warm. Dark. The other riders had not noticed. Find anything? One called. Caleb remained frozen. Waited. Hey, you find anything? Silence. The mounted riders exchanged looks. One reached for his rifle. Caleb raised the Springfield, sighted quickly, and fired. The shot cracked through the timber stand. The mounted rider flew backward off his horse, dead before he hit the ground. The third rider wheeled his horse and spurred hard, crashing through underbrush. Marcus stood and fired, but the shot went wide. The rider disappeared into darkness. Caleb grabbed Marcus's arm. Run! Now! They abandoned stealth and sprinted south through the trees. Behind them, shouts erupted. More riders. The surviving scout had found reinforcements. Hoofbeats thundered through the timber stand. Torches appeared between trees. Caleb counted at least 6 riders, maybe more. Too many to fight. They broke from the tree line near the settlement's edge. Caleb pointed toward the church. "Get Isaiah. Tell him they are coming from the north." Marcus ran. Caleb turned back toward the timber stand, raising his rifle. The first rider burst from the trees. Caleb fired. Missed. The rider kept coming. 2 more riders emerged. Caleb reloaded quickly, his hands moving automatically. He fired again. This time the shot found its mark. A rider screamed and fell. The remaining riders scattered, seeking cover. Caleb used the moment to run, sprinting toward the nearest building, the blacksmith's shop. He threw himself through the door, just as gunfire erupted behind him. Bullets tore through wooden walls. Splinters exploded inward. He crouched low, breathing hard, and reloaded again. Outside, voices shouted commands. Boots hit the ground. They had dismounted. They were coming for him. Isaiah heard the first shots from the church tower. He counted them. 1, 2, 3 distinct cracks from the timber stand. Then a pause. Then more shots. Closer now, coming from the settlement itself. He leaned from the tower window and scanned the darkness. Torchlight flickered near the blacksmith shop. Riders circled the building, dismounted figures moving with purpose. Isaiah raised his rifle and fired at the nearest torch. The flame went out. A man cursed. Isaiah fired again, forcing them to scatter. From the tower, he had height and visibility. He could see what Caleb could not. Reinforcements approaching from the east road. At least a dozen more riders, moving fast. "Josiah!" he shouted toward the ground. "East Road! 12 riders!" Josiah's voice came back immediately. "Hold them. Do not let them reach the shop." Isaiah shifted position, sighting on the approaching riders. He fired methodically, one shot every few seconds, forcing them to slow. One rider fell. Another horse reared and threw its rider. The group broke formation, seeking cover, but they kept coming. Josiah moved through the settlement with 4 men, using buildings for cover. He could see the blacksmith shop surrounded, could hear Caleb returning fire from inside. The younger man was pinned. "David, Abraham, get to the shop's back entrance. Cover Caleb's escape route." Josiah pointed to 2 other men. "You 2, come with me. We push from the west." They split up. Josiah led his group along the back of the general store, staying low. When they reached the corner, he peered around carefully. 6 hooded figures crouched behind barrels and wagons, their attention focused on the blacksmith's shop. They fired sporadically, keeping Caleb pinned but not advancing. Josiah raised his rifle, sighted carefully, and fired. One figure dropped. The others spun toward the new threat. Josiah's men fired simultaneously. 2 more figures fell. The remaining attackers abandoned their positions and ran for their horses. Josiah fired again. Missed. They mounted and spurred away into darkness. "Caleb!" Josiah shouted. "You clear?" No answer. Josiah ran toward the shop, his men following. He kicked open the door and found Caleb crouched behind the forge, bleeding from a gash across his forehead, but alive. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then move. We are falling back to—" The explosion cut him off. The eastern wall of the shop disintegrated in flame and smoke. Debris flew inward. Josiah was thrown backward, slamming into the dirt outside. His ears rang, his vision blurred. He tried to stand, could not. His left shoulder burned with sharp, specific pain. He looked down and saw blood spreading across his shirt. Not a graze, a bullet. Hands grabbed him. David and Abraham pulled him behind cover as more gunfire erupted. Isaiah's rifle cracked from the tower, steady and deliberate, covering their retreat. Through the ringing in his ears, Josiah heard hoofbeats retreating, voices fading. The attack was ending. For now. Dawn arrived gray and cold. The blacksmith's shop still smoldered. Bodies lay in the street. 3 Ku Klux Klan riders who had not escaped, The settlement's people emerged slowly from their homes, faces tight with fear and exhaustion. Ruth worked in the root cellar, stitching Josiah's shoulder by candlelight. The bullet had passed through clean, missing bone. Painful, but survivable. "Hold still," she said. Josiah gritted his teeth. "How many wounded?" "Caleb has a concussion. Isaiah has broken ribs from falling debris. You have this." She pulled the thread tight. "We were lucky. That was not luck. That was skill." The Ku Klux Klan returned at midday. They came in force this time. No scouts, no careful reconnaissance. 60 riders emerged from the tree line at once, spreading across the northern approach in a coordinated line. Behind them, more riders appeared. Then more. The line stretched east and west until it encircled half the settlement. Josiah watched from behind the overturned wagon that served as their command position. His wounded shoulder throbbed despite Ruth's stitching. Beside him, Caleb pressed a cloth against his forehead wound, his eyes tracking the rider's movement. "They learned," Caleb said quietly. "Yes." Josiah shifted his rifle, testing his ability to aim with his injured shoulder. The pain was sharp, but manageable. "They will not make the same mistakes." Isaiah crouched nearby, one hand pressed against his wrapped ribs. "They are spreading too thin. Look at the gaps between riders." Josiah studied the line. Isaiah was correct. The Ku Klux Klan had numbers, but not discipline. Their formation looked impressive, but contained weaknesses, spaces where coordinated fire could break through, sections where riders bunched too close together. "Signal the crossfire positions," Josiah said. Caleb raised a red cloth briefly, then lowered it. Across the settlement, answering signals appeared in windows and behind barricades. Every position confirmed ready. The Ku Klux Klan line stopped 400 yards out. For several minutes, nothing moved. The riders sat motionless on their horses, their hoods making them look like ghosts against the pale sky. Then Captain Wickett rode forward alone, stopping halfway between the line and the settlement. He wore no hood. His face was flushed with anger. "Josiah Freeman!" His voice carried clearly across the open ground. "You have one chance to surrender. Send out your leaders, and we will spare the rest." Josiah did not answer. "I know you hear me, Freeman. I know what you are." Wickett's horse shifted nervously. "You think because you wore a uniform once, you can fight us? You think your nigger war taught you something we don't know?" Still no answer. Wickett waited. The silence stretched. Finally, he wheeled his horse and rode back to the line. "Here they come," Caleb said. The line surged forward as one, horses breaking into a gallop. The thunder of hoofbeats shook the ground. Riders whooped and fired rifles into the air. It was meant to terrify, to break resolve through sheer momentum and noise. Josiah waited, counted yards. 300, 250, 200. "First volley," he said calmly. The settlement erupted in coordinated gunfire. Not wild shooting, not panic. Measured shots from concealed positions, each rifle aimed and deliberate. The effect was immediate. Horses screamed and fell. Riders tumbled from saddles. The charge faltered as the front line collapsed into chaos. "Reload," Josiah ordered. The Ku Klux Klan riders regrouped, spurring their horses left and right to avoid the killing ground directly ahead. They tried to circle, to find weaker positions. Isaiah tracked their movement from his elevated position near the church. "East flank! They are pushing east!" The defenders shifted fire. More riders fell. The Ku Klux Klan attack broke apart into smaller groups, each seeking cover behind the few trees and rocks scattered across the approach. They had lost momentum, lost cohesion. Wickett rode among them, shouting orders, trying to restore order. A bullet cracked past his head, and he ducked low, spurring his horse behind a small rise. For 20 minutes, the battle continued in waves. The Ku Klux Klan would mass for another charge then break under coordinated fire. They tried flanking movements that were countered before they developed. They tried concentrated assaults on single positions that met interlocking fields of fire. Nothing worked. By mid-afternoon, the Ku Klux Klan withdrew to the tree line. Dead horses dotted the field. Bodies lay motionless in the dirt. The riders who remained alive clustered in small groups, their earlier confidence shattered. Josiah lowered his rifle and allowed himself a careful breath. Pain radiated from his shoulder, but he ignored it. Around him, the defenders maintained their positions, weapons ready, faces grim but steady. "Did we win?" a young man asked from a nearby barricade. "We survived," Josiah replied. "That is not the same thing." The Federal soldiers arrived 2 hours later. They came from the South Road in a neat column. 20 cavalry troops in dark blue uniforms, led by a lieutenant who looked barely old enough to shave. They rode past the Ku Klux Klan positions without stopping, without acknowledging the bodies still lying in the field. The column halted in the settlement's center. The lieutenant dismounted and approached the church, where Josiah, Isaiah, and Caleb waited. "Josiah Freeman?" the lieutenant asked. "Yes." "Isaiah Crowder?" "Present," Isaiah said quietly. The lieutenant produced folded papers from his coat. "By order of the Federal District Court, you are both under arrest for inciting armed rebellion and unlawful assembly of armed Negroes." Josiah stared at the papers. "We defended ourselves." "That is not my concern." The lieutenant's voice was flat, bureaucratic. "The court will determine the legality of your actions. The men who attacked us," Isaiah began, "are being addressed separately," the lieutenant interrupted. "My orders concern only you." Caleb stepped forward. "This is wrong." 2 soldiers moved their hands to their pistols. The lieutenant raised one hand, stopping them. "Do not interfere. This is a federal matter." Ruth emerged from the crowd that had gathered. "They are wounded. They need medical care. They will receive care in custody." The lieutenant gestured to his men. "Take them." The soldiers moved forward with restraints. Josiah did not resist. He met Ruth's eyes once, then allowed the cold iron to close around his wrists. Beside him, Isaiah did the same. As the soldiers led them toward the waiting horses, Josiah looked back at the settlement, at the barricades still manned by exhausted defenders, at the smoldering remains of the blacksmith's shop, at faces he had known for years, now watching him being taken away. The Ku Klux Klan riders remained at the tree line, observing, waiting. The federal lieutenant mounted his horse and signaled the column forward. The soldiers formed up around Josiah and Isaiah, creating a moving cage. The column turned south and began riding away from the settlement. Behind them, the town stood exposed, leaderless, vulnerable. Night fell as they rode. The soldiers made camp 5 miles south, chaining Josiah and Isaiah to a wagon wheel. Guards were posted. Fires were lit. Through the trees to the north, other fires appeared. Torches, moving slowly back toward the settlement. Josiah pulled against the chains once, testing them. They held firm. Isaiah sat with his back against the wagon, his breathing shallow from his broken ribs. They planned this. Yes, the Ku Klux Klan and the Federals both. Josiah said nothing. There was nothing to say. They had fought well, survived the assault, protected their people, and still lost. The northern fires grew brighter, closer to the settlement. Josiah closed his eyes and listened to the night. Somewhere in the darkness, the Ku Klux Klan was moving again. This time, there would be no resistance to stop them. The church basement smelled of blood and lamp oil. Ruth worked by candlelight, her hands steady as she stitched the gash across Thomas Perry's scalp. The young man had taken a rifle stock to the head during the fighting. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing shallow. "Hold still," Ruth said quietly. "Yes, ma'am." Around them, the widow's circle moved between wounded men with practiced efficiency. Mary Tate cleaned wounds with boiled water. Elizabeth Crowder, applied poultices of herbs and whiskey. Sarah Moore held a boy's hand while her sister extracted splinters from his forearm. 12 men lay on makeshift pallets. Most would survive. 2 might not. Ruth had seen enough death to recognize when the body was losing its fight. She tied off the final stitch and moved to the next man. Jacob Harrison had taken a bullet through his thigh. The wound had been cleaned and packed, but infection was always possible. Ruth changed the dressing, checking for signs of fever. "How long?" Jacob asked. 2 weeks before you walk properly." Ruth soaked fresh cloth in clean water. "Maybe 3. We do not have 3 weeks." Ruth met his eyes but said not answer. They both knew the truth. The basement door opened. Caleb descended the stairs slowly, favoring his left side. The beating he had endured showed in every movement. His face was bruised purple and yellow. One eye remained swollen, nearly shut. But he was standing, moving, thinking. "How many can travel?" he asked. Ruth straightened from Jacob's pallet. "Travel where?" "North, west, anywhere that is not here." Caleb moved between the wounded, assessing each man. "How many?" 8 could ride." Ruth gestured to the 2 unconscious men in the corner. "Those 2 cannot be moved. 4 others could travel in wagons if the road is smooth." Caleb nodded slowly, calculating. "Wagons will slow us down. Leaving them will kill them. Staying might kill everyone." The basement fell silent. The women stopped their work. The wounded men watched Caleb with varying expressions: fear, anger, resignation. He was not Josiah. He lacked Isaiah's spiritual authority, but he was here, and the others were not. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron. "What are you proposing?" "Evacuation, before they return." Caleb moved to the basement's small window, peering up at the dark sky. "We have hours at most, maybe less." "This is our home," Mary Tate said. Her husband Samuel lay buried 2 days ago. Her voice carried the weight of fresh grief. "They have already taken Samuel. Now Josiah and Isaiah. How much more do we give them?" "Everything, if we stay." Caleb turned from the window. "They will burn this town to ash. They will hang anyone who resisted. They will make examples of us. Then we fight again," Jacob said from his pallet. "With what?" Caleb's voice was harsh. "We have wounded men, frightened families, and maybe 30 rifles that still fire reliably. Our best leaders are in chains. Our defensive positions worked once because we had surprise and coordination. Now we have neither. So we run." Mary's voice was bitter. "We survive." Ruth studied Caleb's face. Beneath the bruises and swelling, she saw something she recognized. The same look Josiah wore when making difficult choices. The weight of command settling onto shoulders that did not want it. "You are afraid," Ruth said. "Yes." Caleb did not flinch from her gaze. "I am afraid of making the wrong choice. I am afraid of staying and watching everyone die. I am afraid of leaving and living with that choice forever." He paused. "But I am most afraid of doing nothing." Upstairs, footsteps moved across the church floor. Young voices called out. Children who did not fully understand what was happening, only that something was wrong. Elizabeth Crowder spoke from where she tended a wounded man. "My husband believed in this place. He believed we could build something that would last. He believed in survival," Caleb replied. "That is why he fought. That is why he trained us, not to hold ground, but to protect lives." "And what happens to those who cannot travel?" Elizabeth gestured to the unconscious men. "Do we leave them to burn?" The question hung in the air. Caleb had no answer that would satisfy. Ruth saw him struggle with it, saw the calculations running behind his eyes. "We hide them," Ruth said. Everyone turned to look at her. "The root cellar beneath the schoolhouse. It is deep enough to avoid fire, cool enough to keep fever down." Ruth moved to the stairs. "We move the ones who cannot travel there, hide them with food and water. When the Ku Klux Klan comes, They will find an empty town. And if they search thoroughly? Mary asked. Then we pray they do not look down. Caleb absorbed this. It could work, if we are fast, if we are thorough. He looked at the women. Can you prepare them to be moved? We can do what is necessary, Ruth said. We always have. The women returned to their work with renewed purpose. Wounds were rebandaged for travel. Splints were reinforced. Medicines were gathered and packed. The basement transformed from hospital to staging ground. Caleb climbed the stairs to organize the evacuation. His footsteps were uneven but determined. Ruth worked until her hands ached. Around her, the widow's circle moved with quiet efficiency born from years of keeping communities alive through impossible circumstances. They had buried husbands and children. They had survived disease and poverty. They had learned that survival was not noble or glorious. It was simply what you did when the alternative was death. The hours passed. The wounded were prepared. Upstairs, families packed what they could carry. Wagons were loaded in darkness. Horses were harnessed as quietly as possible. Ruth checked on the two unconscious men one final time before they were moved to the schoolhouse cellar. Both still breathed. Both still had a chance. That would have to be enough. Dawn came gray and cold. The evacuation was nearly complete. Most families had already departed, heading west toward distant relatives and uncertain futures. 3 wagons remained, loaded with supplies and those too injured to ride. Caleb stood in the empty street, looking at the town that had been his home for 5 years. A rider approached from the south road. Daniel Harris, one of the scouts they had sent out during the night. He rode hard, his horse lathered with sweat. "They are coming," Daniel said, breathing hard. 30 minutes behind me, maybe less. "How many?" Caleb asked. "Could not count them all. More than yesterday. They have wagons this time. Barrels. Kerosene." Caleb understood immediately. The Ku Klux Klan was not coming to fight. They were coming to erase. "Go," Caleb told Daniel. "Catch up with the others. Tell them to keep moving." Daniel hesitated. "You coming?" "Soon." Caleb looked at the remaining wagons. "We need 10 more minutes." "You do not have 10 minutes." Then we move faster. The jail cell smelled of unwashed bodies and rusted iron. Josiah sat on the narrow bench, shoulder throbbing where the bullet had torn through muscle. The federal doctor had extracted it with rough efficiency, then wrapped the wound in clean bandages. Professional care delivered with professional indifference. Isaiah paced the small space. His broken ribs made each breath sharp, but he could not stay still. Through the barred window, they could see the town square. People moved about their business, pretending not to notice the 2 black men locked in the marshal's office. "They will burn it," Isaiah said. "Everything we built. They have already burned it." Josiah shifted his weight, trying to ease the pain. "Whether the buildings still stand does not change that. Then why are we here?" "Because they need someone to blame." The door at the end of the corridor opened. Marshal Henderson entered, carrying a tray with 2 tin cups of water and a plate of cornbread. He slid it through the slot in the cell door without meeting their eyes. "How long?" Josiah asked. Henderson straightened. "As long as necessary." "For what?" "For things to settle." The marshal's voice was tired. "For people to stop talking. For Captain Wickett to be satisfied." "And if he is never satisfied?" Isaiah asked. Henderson had no answer. He returned to his office and shut the door. Josiah drank the water slowly. The cornbread was dry but edible. He ate mechanically, knowing his body needed fuel even if hunger was absent. Beside him, Isaiah finally stopped pacing and sat down hard. "I prayed for peace," Isaiah said quietly. "Every day since the war ended, I prayed we could leave violence behind. We did leave it behind." Josiah set down his cup. "Until it came looking for us. That is not the same thing. It is the only thing that matters." They sat in silence as the morning wore on. 300 miles north, Thomas Greaves sat at his desk in the offices of the New York Tribune. The telegram had arrived at dawn, passed through 3 hands before reaching his. Now he read it for the 4th time, confirming every detail. The message was brief but precise. Names, dates, numbers. A massacre narrowly avoided. Black Union veterans defending their town. Federal authorities arresting the defenders instead of the attackers. And at the bottom, 3 words that made Greaves lean forward. Documentary evidence follows. He did not have to wait long. By noon, a courier arrived with a package wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were documents that made Greaves's hands shake as he read them. Military service records proving the townspeople were decorated Union soldiers. Sworn statements from witnesses describing the Ku Klux Klan attack. A partial roster of Ku Klux Klan members, including names Greaves recognized, county officials, businessmen, a state legislator, and photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Bodies hung from trees, buildings reduced to ash. Men in white hoods standing in formation. The photographs were dated from previous attacks, other towns that had simply vanished from maps and memory, but they established a pattern. They showed systematic destruction. Greaves called his editor. By afternoon, the presses were running. The Tribune was not alone. Copies of the evidence had been sent to 6 northern newspapers simultaneously. Different editors, different cities, all receiving the same information at the same time. Whoever had organized this understood how to prevent suppression, scatter the seeds too widely to be pulled up individually. Negro veterans defend town from Klan terror. Federal authorities arrest defenders, ignore attackers. Decorated Union soldiers jailed while murderers walk free. The headlines varied, but the substance was identical. Names were printed. Captain Thomas Wickett, of the local Ku Klux Klan Clavern. Sheriff Daniel Morris, who had provided advance warning of the attack. 3 county commissioners who had funded Ku Klux Klan operations through misappropriated tax funds. The papers included testimony from witnesses. They described Samuel Tate's execution in detail that was graphic without being exploitative. They listed the property destroyed, the families displaced, the economic damage calculated in precise dollar amounts. But what gave the story legs was the military angle. These were not random freedmen or sharecroppers. These were men who had fought for the Union, who had earned medals and commendations, who had been promised citizenship and protection in exchange for their service. And now they sat in federal custody, while their attackers faced no consequences. By evening, the story had reached Washington. In the jail cell, Josiah and Isaiah knew nothing of what was unfolding. They marked time by the light through the barred window. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon faded toward evening. Marshal Henderson brought them supper. More cornbread, some salted pork, weak coffee. "Any word?" Josiah asked. Henderson shook his head and left. But something had changed in his manner. He moved faster, glanced over his shoulder more often. Through the office door, they heard raised voices. Someone demanding answers. Someone else deflecting questions. Isaiah caught Josiah's eye. Neither spoke, but understanding passed between them. Something was happening beyond these walls. Night fell. The cell grew dark except for lamplight bleeding under the office door. Footsteps came and went in the street outside. Horses arrived. Voices rose and fell in urgent conversation. Then the door opened. Marshal Henderson appeared with another man. Older, better dressed, carrying himself with federal authority that went beyond local jurisdiction. He studied Josiah and Isaiah through the bars. "Release them," he said. Henderson fumbled with his keys. "Sir," Captain Wickett said. "I do not care what Captain Wickett said." The federal officer's voice was cold. "Release these men immediately, or I will add obstruction to the charges currently being prepared against you." The cell door swung open. Josiah stood slowly, testing his wounded shoulder. Isaiah rose beside him, ribs protesting the movement. They walked into the corridor without speaking, expecting some new trap. "You are free to go," the officer said, quietly, immediately. "A wagon is waiting outside to take you north." "Why?" Josiah asked. "Because keeping you here has become inconvenient for people who matter more than Captain Wicket." The officer gestured toward the door. "Do not mistake this for justice. Mistake it for political expedience and accept it." They walked into the night. A covered wagon waited in the alley behind the jail, driver already mounted. No ceremony, no explanation, just freedom delivered in darkness to avoid scrutiny. Josiah and Isaiah climbed into the wagon bed. As it pulled away, they glimpsed Marshal Henderson standing in the jail doorway, looking smaller than before. The wagon rolled north through empty streets. Neither man spoke. The pain in Josiah's shoulder had become a steady throb. Isaiah's breathing was careful and shallow, but they were free, alive, moving away from the place that had tried to become their grave. Only later would they learn about the newspaper, about the evidence that had traveled faster than they could, about the northern pressure that had made their imprisonment untenable. For now, they simply endured the darkness and the motion, trusting that somewhere ahead, the road led toward reunion with their town. Behind them, in offices and meeting rooms they would never see, powerful men made calculations. Arrests were quietly shelved, records were altered. Captain Wicket received urgent suggestions to leave the state for his health. The machinery of compromise ground forward, protecting some while abandoning others, finding the minimum necessary response to quiet northern outrage without fundamentally challenging southern power. The wagon carried Josiah and Isaiah through the night toward uncertain safety, two men released not because they were innocent, but because their imprisonment had become politically costly. They had survived again. Whether that survival meant anything beyond breathing would remain to be seen. The wagon reached town at dawn. Josiah and Isaiah climbed down stiffly, bodies protesting every movement. The street was already alive with quiet activity. Families loaded wagons in the pre-dawn darkness. Children carried bundled blankets. Women wrapped food in cloth. Men secured furniture with rope and leather straps. Everything moved with practiced efficiency. No wasted motion, no raised voices. Ruth saw them first. She crossed the street quickly, her medical bag already in hand. She did not embrace Josiah. She simply looked at his shoulder and gestured toward the church. "Inside," she said. "Both of you." In the church basement, she unwrapped Josiah's bandage. The wound had festered slightly during his imprisonment. She cleaned it with carbolic acid, her movements precise and unforgiving. Josiah did not flinch. "Isaiah's ribs?" she asked. "Cracked, not broken," Josiah said. Ruth moved to Isaiah next, pressing carefully along his ribcage until he gasped. She nodded, satisfied with her assessment. "Bind them tight. No heavy lifting for 3 weeks. We are evacuating today," Isaiah said. "Then someone else lifts the heavy things." Ruth packed her supplies. "Caleb organized everything while you were gone. We leave in 3 groups. First group left yesterday at sunset. Second group goes at noon. Third group waits until full dark." "The Ku Klux Klan?" Josiah asked. "Scouts report they are gathering. Maybe 2 days away." Ruth's voice was steady. "We will be gone before they arrive." Caleb entered the basement, moving with a pronounced limp. His face still showed bruises from his beating, yellow-green fading toward normal skin. He carried a leather case that Josiah recognized, the regimental papers they had hidden beneath the floorboards. "Everything important is already north," Caleb said. "Sent it with the first group. Family records, deeds, anything proving who we are and what we built." "Where are we going?" Isaiah asked. "Pennsylvania, small town outside Philadelphia. People there already agreed to help us settle." Caleb set down the case. "They know what we are, who we fought for. They are willing to take that risk." Josiah absorbed this. Another town, another beginning, the pattern repeating itself across years and miles. Build something. Watch it threatened. Move before total destruction. Build again. Samuel's grave? He asked. Ruth's expression tightened. Left it. Too dangerous to move a body. Then we leave him here. Josiah stood slowly, in unmarked ground. Another disappeared black man in southern soil. There is no other choice, Caleb said. There is always a choice. Josiah walked to the stairs. I am not leaving him for them to desecrate. They worked through the morning. 3 injured men and a handful of others who refused to abandon their dead. The grave was in the town cemetery, marked only by a wooden cross. Josiah had carved it himself, simple and sturdy. They dug carefully, working in shifts when pain forced them to rest. The coffin emerged intact, pine boards stained dark with soil. Josiah had built it the morning after Samuel's murder, working through grief with hammer and nails. They loaded the coffin onto a wagon padded with blankets, covered it with canvas, made it look like furniture or supplies rather than human remains. By noon, the second group was ready to leave. 40 people in 8 wagons, livestock driven ahead by young men on horseback. The caravan moved north slowly, trying to look like ordinary travel rather than permanent exodus. Josiah watched them go from the church steps. His shoulder ached steadily now, the carbolic acid burn competing with the deeper pain of torn muscle. Beside him, Isaiah leaned against the doorframe, breathing carefully around his damaged ribs. We fought a war to be free, Isaiah said quietly, and we are still running. Running is not surrender, Josiah said. Running is refusing to die on their terms. The afternoon passed. More families departed. Buildings stood empty, doors left unlocked, gardens abandoned mid-season, vegetables unpicked, livestock pens vacant, the town becoming a ghost of itself while still physically present. Caleb organized the final group, the most vulnerable, elderly who could not travel fast, families with small children, the injured who needed careful transport. This group would move slowest, so it left last, gambling that the Ku Klux Klan would not arrive before darkness provided cover. Ruth worked until the final moment, packing her medical supplies, checking on those too weak to help themselves. She moved through the town like a general inspecting troops before battle, ensuring nothing essential was forgotten. The weapons? Josiah asked Caleb. Buried in the woods, wrapped in oilcloth and grease. Marked on a map only 3 people carry. Caleb gestured toward the horizon. If we need them again, we know where they are. If we never come back, let them rust in peace. Evening approached. The final wagons assembled near the church. Josiah climbed onto the one carrying Samuel's coffin, his body settling into position beside the dead. Isaiah took the reins, his movements stiff but functional. The caravan began moving north as the sun touched the western trees. Behind them, the town stood empty in the failing light. Houses built with hope. Streets walked with dignity. A school where children learned to read. A church where God was praised in freedom rather than bondage. All of it abandoned without a fight, because fighting meant dying, and dying meant the next generation inherited nothing but graves. They traveled through the night, stopping only to rest the horses. Josiah dozed fitfully, his shoulder keeping him from real sleep. He woke to find Ruth sitting beside him, her hand resting gently on the coffin. He was a good man, she said, stubborn, proud, but good. He refused to kneel, Josiah said. Some men cannot. Ruth looked ahead toward the dark road. The world breaks them before it bends them. And us? We bend. We survive. We carry him north, where he can rest properly. The journey took 4 days. They moved carefully, avoiding main roads, circling wide around towns where white faces might ask questions. Other travelers occasionally passed them going south, but no one interfered. A caravan of black families moving north was common enough to be unremarkable. Pennsylvania appeared gradually, first as a change in the landscape, then as different accents in the few words exchanged with strangers. Finally, as an actual border marked by nothing except Caleb's certainty they had crossed it. The town that received them was smaller than what they had left behind, but it was real. Houses stood ready. Land had been negotiated. White neighbors had been prepared, some welcoming, some merely tolerant, all aware that resistance meant confronting Northern sympathy for Union veterans. They buried Samuel Tate on the 6th day, in a proper cemetery with a stone marker. Josiah carved his name carefully. Samuel Tate, blacksmith, free man. The words were simple but permanent. Isaiah spoke over the grave. Lord, receive this man who would not kneel. Grant him the dignity in death that he demanded in life, and grant us the strength to keep building what he died defending. The townspeople gathered, old and young, veterans, and those born free. They stood together as Samuel was lowered into northern ground, where his rest would not be disturbed. Afterward, Josiah stood with Caleb and Isaiah near the empty grave, 3 men who had killed in war, killed in defense, and now chose to build again, instead of seeking vengeance. Captain Wickett is still alive, Caleb said. It was not a question. Yes, Josiah said. The men who murdered Samuel walk free. Most of them. And we do nothing. Josiah looked at the grave marker, at the town spreading around them, at children playing in streets where they would not be hunted. We do everything, he said. We survive. We build. We make sure the next generation inherits more than rage. That is not justice, Isaiah said. No. Josiah turned away from the grave. But it is life, and life is the only revenge that matters. They walked back toward town together, 3 scarred men carrying their dead and their discipline toward whatever future remained possible. The chapter ended there, in Pennsylvania soil, with Samuel Tate finally at rest and his defenders choosing tomorrow over yesterday. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.